Welcome to your first FRQ, formerly known as free response questions. FRQs are part of the AP Environmental Science exam that you'll be taking in May, specifically on May 4th this year. And you will have 4 FRQs, and we will practice them throughout the school year. And it's very important that you understand how to write a free response question. You can see lovingly dubbed by past AP students as the freaking ridiculous questions, or FRQs. So we're just going to go through how to write one and make sure that you have lots and lots of practice. So first, let's look at the exam breakdown. So it says the AP exam score is 40% free response questions and 60% multiple choice. So as your exam is scored, 40% of your total score is going to come from writing essays from the free response questions, and 60% from the multiple choice. You will have 4 free response questions. I know some other classes may have more or less, but 4 total free response questions, and you will have 100 multiple choice questions. And you'll have 90 minutes for both sections. So 90 minutes for the free response questions, and then 90 minutes for the multiple choice section. And just so you know, if you've never taken an AP exam before, these sections are completely separate. So you'll sit for the multiple choice first, and then you'll seal your booklet, you'll turn it in, and then you'll have a break, and then you'll come back and sit for the 4 free response questions. So you are not able to look back at your multiple choice while you're writing your free response. The FRQ section. Like I said, you'll have 90 minutes for the 4 free response questions. Comes out to about 22.5 minutes per question. And this is basically how you will be scored on the synthesis and evaluation for 2 of them. A data set, you will interpret a table or a graph. Many times there's math involved with the data set. And then a DBQ, or a document-based question. So this is where you'll apply your knowledge to a newspaper article or advertisement. And the DBQs are different than you may have seen in other classes. And I'm going to give you an example, I think, on the next slide here. So let's look at a DBQ. Yep, here we have a DBQ for AP Enviro. So for number 1, usually the DBQ is the first question that they ask you, and so it will give you this article, and it says, read the following article from the Fremont Gazette. The AP writers really like using the Fremont Gazette, and answer the questions that follow. So what you would want to do here is you're going to read this article, you're going to highlight or underline, if it's the actual AP exam, important information about fracking or hydraulic fracturing, whatever you think is important from this article. Maybe you can make some notes on the side. Just remember, you don't have very much time. And then you are going to answer letters A through E. So here we have all these sections that you have to answer. Very important when you write your answers that you write in complete sentences. And always a good idea to label each section. So if you're answering letter A, you're going to write a little letter A next to it, and then you're going to write your answer to letter A, and then you'll do letter B, C, D, and E. Many students ask if you are allowed to go out of order. For example, let's say you know letter D, and you don't know A, and you would really like to start with letter D. You definitely, absolutely can start with letter D in the beginning. The only thing you must do is make sure that you're labeling each section correctly. Some students like to skip a bunch of lines and then go straight to D. I personally, like I said, would just label D first, answer D, and then if you don't know A, you want to wait until the end, until you've thought about it for a little bit, you can always put A at the end. But this is an example of a document-based question, or a DBQ. This gives you your data set question. So it gives you a little bit of background information, as you can see next to the number 2. And then you have some letters here, A, B, and C. So it gives you some background. And if you notice here, 2 of the 3 sections are written. So I know that I am going to stress math if I haven't stressed it enough. But even though that there's a significant amount of math here without a calculator, you can still pick up a lot of points on A and B. So if you don't feel like you're a very strong math student, or by the time it comes down to the AP exam, you're still not comfortable, which we will try and work on as much as possible, you will hopefully still do well on this question because you'll be able to write a lot of the answer to this question. Once you get to letter C, it says that you would use the assumptions below to answer the questions as follow, and then for each calculation, show all work. So some important tips when you're completing the math. Again, you're not allowed to use a calculator on any of the math on the AP exam. But you must show every single step of your work. I know it may sound silly sometimes to show work that you can do in your head, but the AP readers really need to understand that it's your own work and that you have come to that answer by doing calculations, and you need to show them how you got there. Another really important part of the math, units. And if you've had other classes where you need your units, like a chemistry class, it's important. So it's very important to keep your units and to also have them in your answer. And whenever students are completing a math section of an FRQ, I always tell them to circle it. It's even a good idea to write it in a complete sentence so that you know that that number that you're coming to is actually making sense. For instance, nobody uses 12 billion gallons of water per day. So maybe you made a mistake somewhere along your calculation and you can fix that. So if you read it back and you read it in a sentence, it may help you. All this stuff should make sense. So you see calculate, 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 calculate here under letter C. And recently, we have seen a lot of math throughout all of the free response questions. So this is just showing you one section or one question, but in recent years, I have seen math in 2 questions, so more than one. So it's just showing us that they really want students to be well versed with their math skills. For letter 3 here, you can see it gives you another little piece of background information, talks about pesticides, and then it asks you in letter A to design a lab. So that's something that they could ask you to do. Hypothesis, always in an if-then statement. Describe methods, identify a control group, and identify the dependent variable. So they would want you to set up a laboratory experiment, and again, always writing complete sentences. You never need an introductory sentence, but you need to answer every part of this in a complete sentence. And you can see letter B, C, and D. We need to pay attention to these, and like I said, just answer this as completely as possible. And for number 4 for that year, it asks you to complete the diagram. You can see they want you to draw a short little food web here, and we'll talk about food webs in chapter 3, but answer everything in complete sentences. Here they want you just to draw some arrows, so you would just draw arrows, it's fine. If you don't write it in a complete sentence, but I think it's always a good idea, if you have time, to write out everything in a complete sentence at one point. So if you're going to say that the fish are eating the algae, or there's energy going from the algae to the fish, and you have time, why not write it out in a complete sentence, or a couple sentences? And then you have C, D, and E here, which you would also answer, again, in complete sentences. Okay, so here are the scoring statistics for the free response questions in 2011. So it's a little bit old. They haven't released them yet for last year. And I just wanted to give you kind of a roundabout mean for each one of these questions. So every free response question is worth a total of 10 points. And we'll talk a little bit more about this. As we do free response questions in class, you're going to notice that sometimes the points add up to maybe 11 possible points or 12. But the max number of points that you will be able to actually receive is 10. So you're never going to be able to receive more than 10. You can see the mean for these free response questions are pretty low. So I always tell my students, if you're receiving a 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10, very likely that you're beating the national average. This is the national mean. So you can see almost a 5 out of 10 here. We're looking closer to a 3. Wow, almost 2. We have almost like 5 to 6 here. So if you are scoring above a 5 out of 10, say you're scoring 6 or 7 out of 10, a lot of students think, wow, I didn't get all the points that I should have gotten. That kind of translates to a 60 or 70%. but note that nationally, the scores are pretty low on these free response questions from year to year. All right, so actually writing the free response question. You must write in pen. I know a lot of students feel like pencil's way easier because if you make a mistake, you can just erase it. But you must write with black or dark blue pen. If you make a mistake, there's no whiteout. You simply, just like a lab notebook, you just put a little strike through it, and then you can continue on writing whatever you're writing. You're not penalized for whatever you wrote your strike through. Always write in complete sentences. Always, always, always. Everything in my class, if you haven't noticed yet, will always be written in complete sentences. Get right to the point. No introductory or concluding paragraph. We don't have time for that. You really need to just start stating the facts, start defining, using vocabulary, but we do not need these extra sentences that are pointless. The readers are just going to cross them out, not even going to read them. It's just a waste of time. No frills, poetry, or cutesy ideas. Again, that's just going back to get straight to the point. You don't need to, kind of draw pictures or just anything that does not relate to the actual question itself. And here it says no laundry list. So many times you're going to be asked to list maybe 3 invasive species, for example. Or 3 of something, or 4 or 5 or 2. And if you just start listing as many as you can think of because you're not sure which one is correct, only the first however many are going to be counted. So if they ask for 3 and you list 5, only the first 3 are going to be graded. The last 2, even though you may have a correct one, and your 4th or 5th one will not be graded. So it's really important that you're writing the 3 that you know that you feel the most confident with, whatever the question's asking. So no laundry list. The first answers you give are the only ones that are graded. Let's try not to sound like Joe Schmo. So let's try and use good vocabulary. You're going to learn a whole lot of vocab this year. Every time you use a very good vocab word, think of like an environmental science word, you should always define it so that maybe you can actually get an extra point, and we'll talk about those extra points. Like I said before, some of these questions they offer 12 points, and you can only receive up to 10. Sometimes they'll give you something called an elaboration point. So if you were to use a vocab word and then you were to define it, even though the question didn't ask you to define it, you may end up picking up a point for that. So it's always a good idea to define things that you learned in class, define words that you learned in class, no generic answers, and no matter what, no matter how hard the question is, you need to write something. There's never a situation where you just say, you know what, I'm not going to write anything for this question. You never, ever know what the readers are looking for. So if there's a question and you're not really sure, you can skip over that question, save it to the end, and go back. And you really need to come up with an educated guess and something that makes you sound like you know what you're talking about, like you've been sitting in an environmental science class for a full year, and there should be no question left blank. Make sure you're proofreading. You're going to reread your essay to make it better if you have time. Again, time is going to be your enemy here. But always write in complete sentences. Make sure that you have capital letters and punctuation. If you can be more specific, if you can give an extra example. So if you define the term eutrophication, for instance, that's the vocab word, you use it, you define it, and then you actually give an example of a eutrophic lake that we've learned about, that would be excellent. Again, the only thing is you may know a lot of information, but you really got to pay attention to your time. No whiteouts, blackouts, instead draw a single line through the error, which I said, and check your math, and no calculators. Okay, so you guys are going to write your first free response question on Monday, but tomorrow in class I'm going to give you an example of a paper that a student has written for a past free response question, and you're just going to see how the question was set up, how the student formatted the question, and then you're going to figure out what their score was. But basically, like I said, you're going to have 22.5 minutes per question, and you're going to need some time to think. So not even all 22 minutes will be used for just writing. You're going to have some time to think, proofread. We're really talking about less than 20 minutes to actually write your response. So in that 1 to 2 minutes when you're preparing and you're thinking, always a good idea to underline the key words and information that may clue you in onto what you need to be answering. Specifically, what are they asking you to do? Explain, describe, list, compare, contrast, determine, calculate. Let your mind stretch over the question. Jot down words that come to mind. Brainstorm. So as you're reading that question, you just start writing down words next to the question and list points you want to include in your answer. So make sure that you're doing all of this. And like I said, we'll have lots of practice throughout the year. So this is the question that we're going to be looking at for tomorrow in class. I picked this question because it's pretty simple. It's from 2003, as you can see. So over 10 years ago, and these questions have changed greatly since then. But I'm going to show you some papers. You're not going to write or answer this question for tomorrow. You're simply just going to read other students' papers. And the idea is that you're going to be able to figure out, after looking at a rubric, what the students did good and what they didn't do so well on for this specific question. So this was number 3 on 2008. If I was looking through this question and I wanted to point out some key important words here, I'm looking at the word estuary. I'm looking at discuss 2. So not 1, but 2 here. Important causes for variation in temperature and or salinity. Discuss 2 roles. So for letter B, 2 again. Roles that are ecologically important, and 2 roles that they're economically important. So we got to make sure we differentiate these 2 words, because many times students, they read it and they just think, oh, we're in environmental science and I'm thinking ecology, I'm not really thinking economics. But this plays into economics a lot, and we'll talk about positives and negatives with economics related to environmental science. For letter C, it says identify and explain 3 ways. So we're going to identify and explain 3 ways which humans have had a negative impact on or have degraded coastal wetlands. And then for letter D, choose 1 negative human impact that you had identified in C. And I explain 1 environmental policy and 1 economic incentive that could have prevented it. So again, we're looking at these E words, environmental and economic. It's really important to differentiate between them. And like I said, tomorrow we will go through a paper or 2, and we will see what a perfect paper looks like for this question. So I will see you all tomorrow.